I'm Jessica Genauer, a lecturer in international relations at Flinders University in Australia, and I'm checking in with Maxim Professor of International Relations at the National Aviation University and Head of a Centre for New World Order. Thanks for joining me today, Maxim.
Welcome, Jessica.
So there's been some interest in recent weeks regarding whether or not military fortunes on the battlefield might be turning around a little bit for Ukraine. We've seen a very protracted battle in the southeast of Ukraine, in the Donbass region, with a lot of losses on both sides. And then recently, in particular, with the delivery of the first HIMARS systems that came in for Ukraine, we've seen some more military successes for Ukraine on the battlefield. And I'm interested to get your perspective. Do you think that we might see some kind of counteroffensive from Ukraine in the areas that have currently been occupied by Russia, or how do you see that going forward?
Well, actually, as far as the territory of Donetsk region is concerned, the offensive of Russian troops keeps going on there, and very massive attacks. So I don't think it's we can see any counteroffensive. Strategical, I mean, just in tactical, in some areas, we can see it also in Kharkiv Oblast. But of course, the most important is counteroffensive in the Kherson region. It's the south of Ukraine, which has a border with occupied Crimea. During last month, we had some points of effective counter-offensive, but still there is a discussion both in Ukraine and around the world about strategical counter-offensive and whether we can set free Kherson. It's the only regional center Russian troops managed to occupy since February. But from my point of view, that depends. That depends on several issues. First of all, the number of weapons we need. For example, the Minister of Defense, Reznikov, mentioned just 2 days ago that we need about 50 HIMARS for effective counteroffensive, particularly in the southeast, and about 100 to control all the front line, including border with Belarus. So altogether, it's 2,500 kilometers. But as for now, we have 12 HIMARS systems. As you mentioned, we use them very effectively. About 20 storages were destroyed with missiles, shells, etc. So they showed themselves very effectively, and we use them very effectively. Our Western allies also stated about it. So now we are having at least 4 more, as the Minister of US Lloyd Austin mentioned, in next package of military support. Probably we'll get some more from other Western allies, particularly from Great Britain, probably. As you know, yesterday was a very important meeting in Ramstein group. It was the 4th meeting, and me and other experts were expecting the results of it. So as I mentioned, we have enough of living force, but for effective counteroffense, we need HIMARS, artillery, which we still need much more. But the results we don't know for sure. But as Minister of Defense Reznikov mentioned, we'll get necessarily equipment both for sea to protect our sea, air, meaning air defense systems, and artillery as well. But we don't know the numbers. It's, I guess, the first time when it wasn't publicly announced concrete figures. But he was quite optimistic. Mentioned that luckily the representatives of many states stated that they are not tired of war and ready to support Ukraine as long as possible. As you know, these rumors were spread during last few months already in Western media through pro-Russian, I would say, writers, bloggers, politicians, etc. They are working hard on it, I must admit. But another important statement of the US Secretary of Defense is that next month is very important, as we all know. And that US and other allies will not allow Russia to conquer. And the more important, why August is important. September 11, you know, just such a coincidence, this year anniversary, as you know, 9/11 in US, there's going to be an election day in Russia. And they are planning and have already stated that they are going to make so-called referendums there and to join Russia. So it's a big risk, and in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and in Donbass, they are preparing for it. As you know, they made such statements a few months ago, but still, taken into account that this date, election day in Russia, the prognosis, I would say, they do plan it, and the possibility is quite high if we don't start counteroffensive. We know it, so we are preparing for it, and of course, we cannot allow it to happen, because otherwise there is such possibility that Putin, of course, will adjust the results. Nobody doubts about the results of it, as it used to be in Donetsk, Luhansk in 2014. A few thousand people came, they put figures as they want. 90%, of course, 98% would vote for independence at that time, now for joining Russia, etc., etc. Just like as they did in Crimea in 2014. So we know these technologies of them to make referendums and about democracy. So from my point of view, if not full-scale counteroffensive, but anyway, we need to do something, and we're doing actually. During last 3 days, we used very effectively HIMARS systems to ruin the bridge to Kherson, which connects it with another, so left and right side of the Dnipro River. And it's so there are only 2 bridges existing which connecting 2 banks, and this bridge is the main source of transferring resources, military resources, weapons, living forces, etc. So HIMARS worked very effectively. Out of 12 rockets, 11 hit it. You can see it on the picture in my Telegram channel, but it isn't ruined completely, but very close, I would say. And it's already closed for civilian transport. So I guess we need to cut off these breach, and as I mentioned, another breach is on electric station, power station, but it's 100 kilometers away, and we also hit it few times. So we are doing it already. We are preparing for counteroffense. You know, to make it successful, we need to cut off the sources of supply. But as I mentioned, it will depend how much military aid we shall get in the nearest incoming weeks, mostly from US. Because of course, then it will be much more difficult to deoccupy these territories. I'm sure if they manage to do these referendums, just as it was in case with Crimea, very quickly Putin will sign it, and they will make changes to constitution like it was to join newly occupied territories, and then he will be blackmailing the West that that it is Russian territory, official, and if Ukraine, with the help of its allies, will try to deoccupy it or even hit, he will use nuclear weapons, just as they did with Crimea. And ex-president of Russia, Medvedev, also stated several times lately that if we hit Crimea or trying to deoccupy it, Russia will consider it as an attack on its territory and will use all means it has, meaning, of course, nuclear weapons. So nuclear blackmail, it's the most possible way after or if they manage to do it. So I guess 50-50. Mostly, if to analyze chances, anyway, we'll have to do something, and President Zelensky has already signed an order about the occupation of these territories. It's very important for him, particularly because there are a lot of questions why these bridges connecting Crimea and continental Ukraine were not blown up in the first hours. It's also makes destabilization of political situation in Ukraine. His political opponents are using it, media, and of course this question is important. It disturbs everybody, both his supporters and opponents. So therefore, of course, if Putin makes referendums and joins this territory, it will be a big challenge for Zelensky, particularly. He realizes it, and therefore we are preparing. But at the same time, the rumors, the statements, particularly of the head of military intelligence, were made, I mean, of Ukraine, that in August we are preparing counteroffense. Usually, you know, when you are preparing counteroffense, you don't proclaim your plans, yes, to your enemy for him to prepare. And they actually, Russians preparing for it. They just throw their new units, military units, preparing for it. So we'll see. As I mentioned, it will be, if not in August, or at least in second part of August or in September, but definitely, we need to show also to our Western allies that we can bring back our territories to show effectiveness, that we cannot only defend territories, but also deoccupy it. So the potential and possibility is quite high. Anyway, if not August, it's gonna be, it should be not later than October. We should also take into account elections in US, to Congress in November. So we need to show results to American people to prove that they are not wasting time, and they should keep giving us support. And as you know, pro-Trump politicians, Congresswoman, one of them, there were scandals inside Ukraine. They were making very, I would say, controversial statements, which satisfy Russian Federation and Kremlin. And Trump as well made such, why Biden finds $40 billion for Lend-Lease, and though we have inflation problems, etc., etc. So this issue is very important also in US. So therefore, anyway, deadline, I would say, is October. If not August, then October. But anyway, we shall see some, at least tactical counteroffense in August, beginning of September, taking into account the possibility of so-called referendum on that occupied territories.
And we had an announcement from Ukraine quite recently in this regard, talking about enlisting a 1 million-strong force for the Ukrainian military. And I'm curious to understand, like, how serious was that, or how credible was that? Like, are there actually plans in place to enlist an additional? I understand that already since the 24th of February, the Ukrainian army has increased greatly in size due to a lot of the civilian population that have gone and volunteered to join the military forces. But is that a serious proposal, that Ukraine would increase the military to 1 million personnel?
Well, now official figures say that it's about 700,000 we have in armed forces of Ukraine. But you should also take into account police, National Guard, and other units. So altogether, the total number is about 1 million. But of course, we use much less so far. A lot of newly mobilized people and volunteers as well. They are preparing because they are not ready, and we differ from Russia that we don't throw unprepared people on the battlefield at once. There were a few cases in Donbass territorial defense, but just, these things happen on every war. It depends on local commanders, but there were some scandals, but it concerned hundreds of people, not thousands, not talking about of hundreds or thousands of people. So anyway, we are preparing, we need it, because actually, to my sources, Russia also now using officially, like the number who participate in the battles, about 150, 200,000 Russian troops, but we should also take into account mobilized on occupied territories. They are using them as cannon meat, and still they make rotations. So to my sources, the number of Russian army participating in war in Ukraine, sorry, is also about 700,000. So I guess this figure is quite credible, taking into account these things I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just finally, briefly, I wanted to ask you as well. So you talked about Kherson and the importance of Ukraine managing to take back Kherson if possible. And we've also seen reports of, I guess you could say, insurgent activity from within the city of Kherson. So people who are supporting Ukraine but are in Russian occupied territories and are undertaking operations against Russian soldiers who are stationed in Kherson or Russian military personnel. What do you hear of those reports? Like, it's not clear to me the scale of that activity. Like, is it actually enough to be significant in demoralizing Russian troops that are stationed there, or having like a real impact on their capacity to hold the city?
Well, actually, it concerns not only Kherson, Melitopol, and other occupied towns and cities. Well, our forces are quite effective and active there. Especially, it concerns occupational authorities, those who decided to collaborate with occupants. There were a few cases when their cars were blown up. Some of them, top officials, were at least injured. So it's necessary, of course, to show that if you are ready to betray your motherland, yes, and to cooperate with aggressor, the punishment will come, and very soon. So yes, and I can say it's quite effective and quite active, our deeds, and I'm sure it will be increased in coming months as well, just as preparation for counteroffensive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Maxim. Appreciate you sharing your reflections, and talk to you again soon.
You're welcome.